Okay, welcome back to the second episode of the Regs. All right, last time we talked about, or I mainly went through the life history of a pink salmon, a few pros and cons of the overproduction of pink salmon in hatcheries, and then a few of the pros and cons regarding what impact they have on the environment as far as out competition with other species, and even what biomass they bring up to streams to keep them productive during the summer months and through the winter months. And so today we're going to talk about chums. And chums are really cool. I like them a lot because they get really big, and in some areas bigger than silvers on average. They have a very diverse diet. They are also the leanest of all the salmon, and they get about as old as sockeye do, mainly around 4 to 5 years, in some cases 3 to 5, depending on the stock. And they're also uh, not commonly caught while trolling, but it does happen. Same with mooching. And they're also a very commercially valuable fish, and they don't quite outcompete all the other species because they don't have giant, numbers like pinks do. And you could really say that for you could say the same for all the species except maybe sockeye, but they are generally a really good fish to have in a freshwater system. So, uh, now let's go back to our hypothetical stream, same, in our where our pink salmon was, and just before the pink salmon came the chum salmon. And just like pink salmon, chum salmon can also spawn in saltwater. However, they don't have quite as bad of a, we'll call it GPS, as pinks do. So they don't stray nearly as much as pink salmon do. So our chum salmon spawns, its eggs are laid, and they can also lay their eggs in intertidal zones in the saltwater just as well as freshwater, and just like pink salmon can do. So our chum salmon spawns in the intertidal zone, okay? And its body is eaten away by and decomposed by decomposers like the starry flounder and the sculpin and even the halibut that hang around the mouth of the kenai occasionally. Its body goes away, its nutrients are put back into the freshwater system and even the ocean, and it keeps things productive. It fuels planktonic bloom that feeds the fish when they hatch. So our chum salmon hatches, and after I don't know, after it's absorbed all the thermal units it needs to grow, okay, and it is normally around, ooh, when I was at, I was about to say the hatchery I worked at, and I don't want to say the hatchery I worked at, or one of them, anyways. When I was at this one hatchery I worked at this year, when I arrived there September 29th, the chum salmon were just about to hatch. And then over the next couple weeks, they hatched fully. So it's normally around uh, the start of October in and through that month, depending on when they spawn. In the summertime, usually around just the start of fall or a little later than that. They can spawn anywhere from the start of October all the way into November. It just depends on when they spawn. So they are hatching, and they, just like all the other salmon species, they burrow deep into the gravel and substrate where they live and continue to absorb more CTUs and incubate. And then after a while, they literally pop out of the ground, normally at night, And that's when I say normally at night, I mean that in a broad stroke. Of course, there are going to be some that rise during the day, but these ones are more likely to get picked off by predators like trout and dollies and even other salmon smolt. All right, so our salmon has roes, and just like the pink salmon, uh, it's going to live for about 6 months in its freshwater environment, feeding on the planktonic bloom that its parent created when it died and decomposed. And so then eventually in the springtime at night, when there's a lot of water from snow melt and rain and storms in the spring, they move out over the course of about a couple of weeks into this marine environment, and then from there they go out into the ocean. And I don't know a whole lot. Like I know a whole lot, but I don't know a whole lot because there's not quite as many studies on it about where chum salmon migrate to. But they have one of the most diverse diets of all of the salmon, eating literally everything from other fish, even other juvenile salmon, to squid, to sardines, everything and anything that can fit in their mouths, essentially, except jellyfish, pretty much. So our chum salmon moves out and it stays in the ocean, migrating for let's say this particular fish stays out in the ocean for 5 years. So it is a 5 ocean fish, and it gets the biggest a chum salmon can possibly get. And it decides it prefers in its diet more fish than other animals like crustaceans and planktonic critters like reds do and a lot of other salmon do earlier in their marine life, or the earlier in the stage of their life where they're living in the marine environment. So eventually, of course, just like the pink salmon, iron molecules in its head that align with magnetic north and south, and then the timing of the seasons tell it it's time to start heading back to its home stream. So it starts heading back to its home stream, and just like the pink salmon, it uses smell to zero in on its home stream. And instead of going into the salt water like it did, or its parent spawn in the intertidal zone, this one decides it wants to go all the way up into the Kenai Lake. So it goes all the way up into the Kenai Lake when the tide is right, and they can ride the tide up into the lake. For the record, the tides have very little influence on streams and rivers. There's a huge misconception about this, that the only influence that the tide has on rivers is when the fish move up generally. I don't know why people think that the tide, and I'm talking in a broad stroke, this is very typical of most Alaskan streams and rivers, that the tide has little to no influence on streams more than, like, I'll give you this much, more than like half a mile up them. This is dependent on the size of the river, but I don't know why, but like people on the Knik River, for some reason, and I fished this river a lot, think that the tide has a far-reaching effect up it to like the frickin' glacier. It doesn't. I don't, like, again, the only influence it has is when the fish move up and down it. The only other influence I could see it ever having is if the water was high enough that it was affecting the water level already, and then the tide moving out affects the rest of the river. That's about it. Otherwise, I don't know. It's just a weird thing that people think for whatever reason. And yeah, I don't know. Fishermen. Okay, here's the thing. Most fishermen are dunces. Okay? This is not necessarily a sport known for its... Actually, it is a sport known for its very intelligent people, but but it's either known for that or really stupid people. Um, but now I will never ever shame anyone for not knowing something, okay? At least I make a great effort not to. And the whole point of people listening in on this is to learn something anyway. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you learn from it, and I hope you gain a better understanding of why regulations should change, or you should change your fishing practices, treat the fish better, etc. So the whole point is to get smart. And you don't get smart without a little effort. And their little effort is just sitting back and relaxing and driving to your work or whatnot, or listening to this on your lunch break. My 10 people, the 10 viewers who looked at my last podcast. But anyways, so our chum salmon has decided to go all the way up to the Kenai Lake to spawn. It has gone all the way up there. It's got its tiger bars going, nice pinks, purples, and blues. It's a beautiful fish. It's got a hooked snout because this one's a male, and it's fighting off other males for the right to spawn with females, which salmon do. That's why they get a hooked snout, and all salmon males get hooked snouts to one degree or another. There's this misconception on, like, for people, I've seen this most with dip netters on the Kenai. They'll catch like a male red, and because it has a hooked snout early on, they think it's a pink salmon and toss it back, which is, you know, just a good instance of people not knowing what the hell they're catching or doing. But anyways, so our chum salmon moves up, spawns, and the cycle continues. It's very similar to a pink salmon, except for the fact that they get a lot bigger, live a lot longer, and do not stray as much as a pink salmon. Now, here's the cool thing about chums. Chums do not overwhelm all the other species with sheer numbers like pink salmon do. And also the cool thing about chums is that, so like for bears and seals, sea lions, whatever you want, they're arguably a better food source. The reason being is that because chums are so lean, they still eat, you know, all those fatty foods and whatnot. However, all of that fat tends to go towards their eggs instead of their flesh, like a red does, or a king, for instance. So, in a lot of bears and a lot of seals don't really eat the flesh of salmon. I mean, they will, but what they're really after is the eggs more often than not, or even the brains, because they're really high in the fatty tissues and resources that they're after to survive the winter and build up fat. Literally, a salmon egg is just a little ball of energy. It's just fat and oil and good stuff that a lot of subarctic and arctic fishes and animals need to survive. So when all these chums move up a stream, they're providing arguably more to these animals that need them to survive. Like, the energy return is not that much more than any other salmon eggs, but it's a notable amount to the point where I would always be more in favor of having a stream jam-packed with chums than I would pinks any day of the week. And I am biased towards pinks. I just don't like pinks. They are completely... There's just too many of them. And I think they're damaging to the environment a lot of time. So, that's one benefit. Another benefit, as far as hatcheries go, hatcheries can make returns on money through the harvest of chum salmon roe, actually, because there's a pretty big market, especially in Asia, in Japan, for chum salmon roe. So it's a really good source of money for the hatchery, so they don't have to continuously draw from funds that the state gives them. And they're cheap to raise too, which is really nice. About the same level of expense as a pink salmon, because it only takes 6 months of, caring for them as far as feeding and rearing goes. So it's a really great way for a hatchery to make back money. The drawback to chum salmon, though, is that they are susceptible to a virus called IHN, which it's interesting. This virus looks identical to Ebola, and just like Ebola, it causes necrosis of the fish's vital organs. So, pretty nasty virus. And in all sockeye, for instance, carry this virus, and a lot of sockeye rearing is actually centered around making sure this virus doesn't have an outbreak and not stressing out the fish. But chums, because they don't carry it, they're just susceptible to it. It's definitely a lot easier to raise them and not have to, rear them around the fact that they're all carrying this virus. So chums, you have to be a little more stringent than like pink salmon, for instance, which, to quote a fish culturist I work with, pink salmon are rats of the sea, and they're just freaking invincible. Little to nothing gets them sick. So that's another reason pink salmon are so favored as far as the hatchery scene goes. But chums are definitely a close second because they just don't really get sick either, except from things like IHN, which again, they don't carry it, so it's not that common that they have outbreaks unless there is salmon in your water source. At the lake they get their water source from at this hatchery, there is salmon in it. Kokanee, landlocked kokanee. And kokanee are not just any landlocked salmon, you dunces. Calling my viewer my dunces, but hey, you're less of a dunce for listening to this. Kokanee are landlocked sockeye. They're not just landlocked whatever. They're just because a salmon is like a silver salmon is landlocked does not make it a kokanee. A kokanee is specifically a landlocked sockeye. So that's why, anyways, I'm getting off track, but that's the whole point why chum salmon are really nice for hatcheries and way better for the environment. They do a lot more in terms of feeding of animals, even other fish, because their eggs are so high in fat and nutrients compared to all the other salmon species. They're cheap to raise, and you get good returns. The drawback is just IHN and the fact that they live so long, you don't get immediate returns like pink salmon do. That's the main trouble with them. So it's not so bad. And they are commercially valuable, but mostly just for their roe, not necessarily their meat. Although chums still do catch a higher price per pound than pink salmon do. So one reason why chum salmon are even a better subsistence fish than pinks and a lot of the other salmon are because chums, they're so not fatty, they tend to stay better actually than other salmon, or smoke better anyways. I've heard this is more of an argument, but I believe in the side that they tend to keep and stay better than a lot of the other salmon species, just because they don't spoil as quickly because of the fat content in their flesh. So, and another fun fact for you, actually, chum salmon are one of the few salmon you can smoke after they've got their spawning colors and everything, and they'll still taste almost the exact same as they would as if they never entered their spawning colors and used up what little fat reserves they did have. Yeah, so there you go. Chum salmon are awesome. That's the bottom line. They're absolutely fantastic. Uh, I think that if there were more chum salmon in this state, um, there would be a lot healthier stream systems and wildlife around them and in them, just because of the kinds of nutrients they bring back, not just through sheer numbers, but think of chum salmon as a quality over quantity kind of fish, as far as how they help their uh, freshwater ecosystems. So instead of having like a billion pink salmon move up into a stream, dig all the other salmon eggs out of a stream that spawned before them, uh, erode the stream for one thing. Pink salmon are pretty notorious for doing that, and just completely out competing everything else through sheer overwhelming numbers. You have, let's say, only 500 million, so half a billion chum salmon move up. They're more particular on where they like to spawn, so they dig out less of other salmon eggs out. Their eggs are so much higher in fats and nutrients, so a lot of the other animals that like to eat those have to do less to get what they need to survive the winter. And so that goes for other fish too, because other fish like to eat their eggs. Wow, big shocker. And so and they don't stay in freshwater environments just as long as pinks. That's also just a pro, because they don't have to take as much out of where they're living until they go into the ocean. So just chum salmon are really nice. I really don't have a whole lot to say about them, and as far as bad stuff goes. As far as fishing, I absolutely love catching a chum salmon because they're big. They're not necessarily known for their fights. In a lot of my experience with catching chums, they just kind of sit and roll. They don't try to, they just use their weight to fight against you. They don't really run. They don't really jump or leap. And of course, I'm talking in broad strokes here. So some places might have pink salmon or chum salmon that do that more, but in my experience, chums just don't really fight. So if you're looking for a fight in a salmon, they're not really it. But I will not deny they are still a really cool fish to catch, especially on a fly, like I like to do, because they've got arguably the coolest colors of all the salmon do. So, yeah, chums are cool. They're just really, really cool. As far as subsistence goes, I already kind of touched on this, but they are still a really nice fish as far as subsistence. Don't really have much commentary on them. They come back easy. The only drawback as far as being a subsistence fish is the fact that they don't stay out in the ocean for a short period of time, so they don't come back quickly. So it's because of that fact, it's easier to overfish them and screw things up. So that's a big issue, or can be a big issue with them. And that's a big thing around why regulations need to change around a lot of fish, is the fact that they're so long lived and don't spawn as often as you might think, because the collection it takes of energy to get to the point where they develop the organs to spawn takes so long and is so much effort. So with chum salmon, you're fortunately not doing a whole lot of damage to their population by removing, let's say you need 500 fish to survive the winter, okay? You live in Western Alaska or wherever remote kind of place, okay? You're not some person in civilized area like the Valley or Anchorage or somewhere on the Kenai Peninsula who thinks that they can't go to the grocery store and get what they need to survive and end up having to overcrowd rivers like the like the entire Kenai Peninsula, because we're Alaskans. We need to. It's just, it goes back to a take state, okay? And because of this, that's why the Kenai Peninsula has some of the most strict regulations behind it, is because of the amount of people that go there, whether or not they actually really need to take fish to allegedly, because they can't allegedly survive the winter without them. Even though there's a grocery store like every other block in the city of Anchorage, let alone the valley. That's just a gripe, though. I know everybody's situation is different, but I'm mostly talking about a lot of the people who can afford to, survive the winter without going down and taking fish from people who might actually need them. Anyways, but that is more for a later episode than it is for this one. So, I completely lost my train of thought. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, chum salmon. They're just, again, and I've stated it for like the 50th time now, but they are cool. They are awesome. I absolutely love them. I think they should be more prized as a subsistence fish than a lot of the other salmon because of their roe quality, the meat quality, and the fact that there are a lot of them and they don't take as long. They take longer than silvers or pinks, but they still come back in great numbers, which is why they should be more valued as a subsistence fish. Yeah. Anyways, this is going to be a shorter episode, only about a half hour long, but I will be coming out with episode 3 very soon. And on the next episode, we're actually going to be talking about, drum roll please, silver salmon, which I do have a lot of experience with. Also, I have a lot of experience with all 5 of the salmon species, whether raising them, catching them, or learning about the culture behind why they're prized this way rather than another way. So there you go. We're going to be talking about silver salmon next, and the silver salmon are probably my second favorite of all the salmon, and are probably, again, one of the better prized salmon as far as subsistence goes. Probably even better than chums, believe it or not. And I just spent the last half hour hyping up chums as this grand end-all be-all fish in hatcheries and in the subsistence scene, as well as commercial. But silvers are arguably better, but there's a problem with them. They are the cheapest of all the salmon as far as cost and price per pound, and I will explain why in the next episode. So stay tuned, and I may even just start the next episode right after I stop this one. But I need a break, and I also have to go feed my dogs. So stay tuned. I'll upload it soon, and thank you for listening.